can maybe just walk through the areas that the customers I talk to regularly are dealing with, and then maybe we can just organically go from there, just so we have a starting.
That works.
Okay, let me.
Thank you.
And Drew, please feel free to correct me if I misspeak about any of these, because I'm also still learning some of these capabilities. So let me share this. Okay. So the primary areas that I've been dealing with are largely around push rules. So push rules being where the organization can control how changes are being made to production, as far as like, does the commit message have to be prefixed or meet some particular pattern? Does the author, I believe, or the author's email have to match their domain, such as, you know, customerdomain.com? And so they're defining these at the instance level, but the problem that we run into is that they like it generally, but every group and project can be different. So there's usually, let's say 80% of projects are subject to some strict policy, but then the other minority percentage shouldn't have those same strict level of requirements. And so there's that balance that can't happen right now, because it's either all or nothing. So all groups and projects are subject to these things, or they're not, is my understanding. So we're bringing some of the, so we just brought this, we're in the process of bringing this to the group level. We encountered an issue when trying to implement it. It was a performance consideration, so we're navigating that, and that's maybe worth exploring as well, as we bring some of these things to the group level for GitLab.com and better control for self-managed customers. There may be those performance considerations elsewhere. The other area, let's see, I want to say, yeah, this one I'm looking at right now, because this is the feature that I believe Sid came down and said, hey, we shouldn't support this because this is counter to velocity. It's not very efficient. This there is, customers have pipelines that they want to run regardless. They say, hey, here's this like parent or default pipeline that should run for every single merge request or deploy to production that's ever done, but developers or maintainers should be able to amend like additional pipelines or jobs to that. So they have this like parent pipeline that has to run across all projects, let's say, but then there should be flexibility to support localized maintainers to add to that. And so right now we're building a case to justify like, hey, we should empower customers to be able to do this thing. If they want to be less efficient, that's their decision. That's not our place to be prescriptive necessarily. But this is one area that we're trying to figure out, how do we bring this to the group level, which is the ask. Like, hey, this is great at the instance level, but similar to the push rules, we don't want it for all projects in some cases. We just want it for, you know, this group over here or this subgroup or what have you. So looking to bring this to the group level.
I'll ask a quick question on that before we move on. So the things that where Amanda and I are sort of trying to understand is the gap between group owners and sysadmins, in that it maybe something like, hypothetically, say this is like, if you drop this to the group level and a group owner could do it, does that give them too much control over it? We're trying to look for that sweet spot. Like, what are things that, like, we don't necessarily want to drop them down to a group owner, because there might be like a lot of group owners, right? And you might not want every single group owner to be able to do this. So what is, if as you're kind of talking about these things, if there's anything that like you're like, oh, I wish there was like a sort of middle ground where we could like enable customers to do this, but not have it so open to like the whole customer organization, to every single group owner that exists. Because I feel like a group owner permission is exactly that. It's to own a group, whereas it's not, and it's not necessarily like the original goal of that wasn't to administrate something. Right. It was to own the group specifically, when there's kind of more to it than that. So yeah, if there is anything like that that pops up, like when you're talking through things, like it'd be really helpful to know, so that we can consider it like as we're trying to move forward with whatever solution we decide to go with.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I'd have to maybe go back through some call notes, but I can tell you just anecdotally, without like hard quotes or data points to refer to off the top of my head, that is a underlying problem or need. So for self-managed customers, I think that concern is valid, because in self-managed you have access to admin, but if we bring it to the group level, then that's where you need the ability to lock down, like, well, we don't want group owners to have this because we as admins can already do it. For GitLab.com, it's different because they don't have access to that elevated admin role. So to your point, yes, there is a requirement for a middle ground role at that point. So if I had to delineate, I would say for self-managed customers, bringing things onto the group level is primarily about ease of use and configuration and management overhead of the groups, or I guess the instance. And for GitLab.com, bringing it to the group levels because they're just solely lacking that ability, but the paradigm's a little bit different.
It would be, thank you, that's really helpful. It would be really cool if we could somehow like label these issues as something that just says that indicates like, hey, this is something that we're thinking about, but it's a feature that would be great, would hugely benefit from having this additional workspace administrator role. Like, we can talk about that later, but it'd be good to be able to kind of identify what those issues are as you're working on them.
I think as an interim, I could probably go back, at least for my planning issues, and compile a list somewhere for you that says, hey, of these, let's say 15 issues spread across the last 3 milestones, here are the ones that I think could be in part or in whole solved by that workspace administrator role.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
We've run into some similar issues with things like LDAP. Right now, the LDAP group sync is configured exclusively at the group level, and some organizations have strict requirements around managing authentication authorization. And so if any group owner can go in and remove or change the LDAP group links, then that has some compliance problems for that organization. And in the past, we've basically taken the stance that, well, if that's your requirement, then you should only allow global administrators to be owners at the group level. But I think that's a good example of some of those competing requirements that you were just talking about, differences with self-managed and GitLab.com potentially.
And real quick, I just realized that this meeting runs for an hour and I have a call at 12, so I'll try to get through my part before then. And then I can follow up with whomever afterwards if there's more questions for me.
Yeah, thanks, Max.
Let's see. I'm trying to think what else. I think those are the big ones right now. So the compliance group added this section, the credentials menu item, to bring visibility into the personal access tokens and SSH keys. The intent is to add additional secrets such as deployed keys or anything else that, or at least metadata about those credentials that a group owner or administrator wants visibility into, but we're still kind of learning and validating what those additional ones might be. It's also meant to evolve into like, hey, here's a place where you can go to see what's expired, what central place to revoke things, etc. So that's one area that's fairly lightweight right now. So that's kind of easy to describe. The other,
What's under preferences?
I'm sorry?
What? Never mind. I'll ask you in a minute. I was just gonna say what's under the preferences menu.
Preferences. Oh, this one?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then help page.
So I wonder if like stuff like this could be easily drop downs for workspace admins to configure if they had their own sort of isolated space to work in. Anyway, that was just curiosity.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it touches on at least partially a thought I've had, which is it seems like we just need to do an auditing of everything in the admin area, because it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to really consolidate things and make it much more intuitive and user-friendly. You know, for example, like we have deploy keys separate from credentials. Like that's one quick win I think we could achieve. But just seeing all of this stuff here, and personally what bugs me from a UX perspective is how this is all laid out. Like, this is not very easy on the eyes. It's not easy to digest everything that's here. It's difficult to delineate like when a section is starting and stopping, especially with the different weighting of the headers and things like that. So just a general like, hey, we should just revamp the whole thing would be great.
Yeah.
It is difficult to find settings too, like on a page like this, especially where there's so many sections. You can't, I don't think you can use the browser find feature. And it's also a bit of a weird UX where if you go like further down the page, expand something, change some settings and click save, you don't necessarily end up back in that same place.
Yep.
Yeah, it's stuff to think about. For sure.
Can I ask, is there a specific group that handles the admin area?
For GitLab.com, you mean?
Yeah. Or yes, self-managed actually. What we're looking at.
So are you asking if there's like a particular group that handles like or manages that section of the application?
Yes, exactly.
I don't think so. I think it's kind of like the to-do page. I think we all just kind of add stuff to it and do our best to make it a unified experience, which I think we generally rely on like the UX and solution validation processes to help us with that. I don't know, Luca or Drew, if you have a different perspective there. But if not, I'll continue with this real quick. So another thing we added that I can explain is the minimum password length. There was a lot of debate about helping organizations enforce password entropy. Password entropy is essentially the idea that the complexity of a password, all things considered, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, length of the password, all of those create an output value, and that output value is, let's say, 64, and that is the entropy of the password or the strength of it. We went with minimum password length as an MVC, first iteration. Management's perspective on this was basically like, well, we should make it simple. Best practices according to NIST are to keep basically a long and complex password without specifying what complex is. But we'll be eventually adding to this to say, well, if you as an admin want to optionally require a minimum number of capitals, numbers, special characters, et cetera, you should be able to do that. So right now that lives in sign-up restrictions, which I don't know if that's necessarily makes the most sense, but that's one area I can provide insight. I think the only other section I can really speak to that we've added to or dealt with is this. So a big issue that's a headache for many customers, and I think there's probably a dozen or so issues open that are maybe related in some way, is tied into the concept that, particularly on GitLab.com, we're looking to bring these settings to the group level. I think these two in particular, because right now, if an organization says, hey, developer, I want you to be able to go, like, they have this setting, right? That developers and maintainers can create projects, but then their default branch protection, which I believe for GitLab.com is set by us as the company, is set to fully protected. So that says only maintainers can push new commits. So on GitLab.com, a developer creates a new project, but they can't initialize it with a README, and that's exposed as an option. So that's one UX breakdown or expectation breakdown, that they can't initialize with a README. But then they also can't push the first commit because the default branch protection kicks in. So when they go to try to push that commit, only maintainers can do it because now that feature is active, and so developers like, well, I can't do anything, so they have to involve a maintainer.
They also can't do things like set issue templates and all that sort of stuff as well. So like they create a project and it's actually very limited on like what that person can do in terms of managing that project. So if they set something up and it has a purpose,
right,
they can't define what that purpose is. They have to wait for a maintainer owner to be able to do that.
Yeah, and so I think we discovered that there is two primary use cases. One where, hey, we're willing to let our developers have this freedom to create a project, push some code, and then we as a maintainer or owner can go in later and change that default branch protection to only allow maintainers. And so it's protected from there forward. The good thing about bringing these to the group level is you can do like, and let me know if this context isn't helpful. I'm just trying to navigate that, like bringing stuff to group level or not. The nice thing about bringing this to group level is you can say, well, if I'm a fairly flexible organization, I'll let developers and maintainers create projects, and I'll let developers also push new commits. If you're pretty conservative as an organization and risk averse, you can say, well, I only want maintainers create projects, and I only want maintainers to be able to push new commits. And so you have these like pseudo workarounds in the interim while we figure out a better solution. But to your point, Luca, there's a separate use case, as I understand it, which is we're an organization that wants even more flexibility to say when a developer creates a project, promote them to maintainer for that project only, which gives them a lot more flexibility, but that's not desirable for the more risk-averse organizations. I think both of these would exist.
Yeah, and exactly. I think they're solving two different problems, which is the conclusion that we sort of came to when we were talking about all of this. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, I think just generally all of this, or a majority of this, probably makes sense to bring into the group level. Because if the idea is we're trying to empower group owners, primarily thinking about GitLab.com, and until we have that workspaces admin concept, then to me, it's logical to say, well, everything we give to admins, more or less, without breaking things technically, should probably be available to group owners.
Is there anything on this page that you think it would be preferable to not give it to group owners? Like maybe some of it's fine to kind of drop down to the group owner level, but is there anything that you would feel like kind of even slight anxiety about giving that freedom to a group owner, like that a workspace admin would be better off having it? Because you keep saying like drop it down to the group, but like that doesn't sound like an ideal solution. It's been kind of like we don't really have a choice at this point because it's the only role that exists.
Yeah, so I guess I should preface or clarify to say that I'm phrasing things in the current circumstance where it's a group owner with the expectation that we bring this functionality down to the group level, but then change the roles so that it's the workspace admin that has this access, not the group owner. So the group owner kind of moves down a level later.
Is it something that do we want to do that, or do we want to would it make sense to prioritize a new role first, or would it make sense to kind of do the work, drop it down to group owner, and then bring it back up again? That seems like extra steps.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I don't know the right answer there. That's just where my mind goes.
Yeah. Thanks, for anyway, for our group. In terms of priority, right? So there's like so much stuff that it's just about like, hey, we really just need someone else to be able to own this at the workspace level or whatever we want to call it. Just maybe it makes me consider like, what do we do first? Like, what is the priority in terms of how we iterate towards like whatever we call the space that people are going to work in.
Yeah, and I think to answer your original question there, as far as is there any concern over what settings are bring down, I would have to go through and do an audit, but I think the general rule of thumb would be that any setting in here that was originally designed to apply to all groups on the SaaS offering is probably something that we would want to pause. Like, for example, if I look at even just this default projects limit, I don't know if it makes sense to have that be an unbounded value for a GitLab.com customer. For self-managed, fine, because that's their resources, that's their computing power and their cloud infrastructure. But for GitLab.com, that's our infrastructure. And if there's a use case where they need more than 1,000 projects, like that's probably something that should be sussed out maybe during like the onboarding process to figure out why they need that many, if that's a valid use case, to then adjust that or something, just brainstorming. But those are the types of things that, yes, I agree with you, should be given second thought.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
A couple of things that I can see being potentially a problem or something we at least need to work through. I know right now, a lot of these settings in the admin area are just defaults and can be overridden at group and project level. Push rules is a good example. By setting push rules in the admin area, you're not restricting these things indefinitely. It's only a default. So at the project level, somebody can come in and say, well, I don't want any of these, and they just turn them all off. I don't know if that's really what admins want. And then if we take some of this, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a really helpful. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they were just setting defaults. I thought it was like enforcement. So one of the things that I mean, the Access group are working on group managed accounts right now. So that's one problem that we're trying to solve just from an authentication perspective, right? So like when you can only you set like how people can log into their group on GitLab.com, but one way that we've considered like iterating towards more of an isolated kind of enterprise experience is allowing GitLab.com customers to be able to enforce settings, like rather like it's set as a default and then people underneath that can't change it. So it's kind of an interesting point to like know, even as a sysadmin, like what are things that actually like, do we want to start thinking about how do we enforce settings rather than like how do we just set a default? Maybe you can do both. I don't know.
Well, and to that point, this will be the last thing because I got to hop off, I think. But this, I think, touches on it. So we released this in 12.8, or will be releasing, and I think it achieves something related. So in the admin area, we added these 3 project settings for merge request approvals. And if enabled by an admin, they're in the admin panel, then at the project level, they become unmodifiable for any non-administrators. And that was a major ask to both of your points that there needs to be an enforcement piece to it if the administrator or customer decides that's the case. But that should also be flexible enough that they can toggle that behavior. So I don't know how that manifests, if it's a yes, enforce this everywhere, or if it's a only enforce this for selective groups, which is one feedback we got, which is, hey, this is a little too broad. We need to be able to select what groups this applies to or which ones should be exempt from it.
I mean, even if it was like, I mean, I tend to try and steer away from additional config, but like, even if there was just a way to say like, this is either enforced or default. Like if it's default, then it's changeable at the group or project level. If it's enforced, then it can't be changed at all. And then maybe you're able to do that like at the instance level, at the workspace level, at the group level, and just allow more granularity over how people are actually managing their work and project and whatnot.
Yeah, let's definitely reconnect because there's another issue I'm working on for 2-person approvals. So if, for example, one use case is this: if I'm an admin and I enable these settings, but then a maintainer is like, no, this doesn't apply to my project. We're trying to build an experience where the maintainer can or disable those, but it generates kind of an approval request, maybe in the to-dos page. An admin or group owner, whomever, could come in and say, yes, this is okay for this project, and that's one way to do it, which maybe alleviates us from additional configuration to some degree, but definitely worth syncing up on, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, let's do that. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
I think that this is good to think about. And in a way, I kind of see that the admin level settings are sort of like a part of the group hierarchy. It's a little bit like the admin settings are the top level of a group subgroup setting hierarchy. So maybe whatever we come up with at the group level, I mean, we're going to have to understand how that hierarchy affects those settings for groups. So then maybe that can be extended to the admin settings as well.
Well, sorry to kind of brain dump and run, but thanks for listening, and let's definitely reconnect if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Matt. This is really helpful.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. So Drew, I don't know if you want to maybe just carry on with the same theme that Matt started up, like from your experience as a .com administrator. That is something that you were able to do before, right? And I just put in the wrong something.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. GitLab.com.
Yeah. So when you were working as a support engineer, what level of access did you have to .com? I know you predominantly worked on self-managed, but does everybody have in support have access to the systems administration role on .com? I'm not sure how
I did for a long time, but I think maybe about a year ago, they removed that access. I hadn't done a lot there for a long time. We were splitting those roles a little bit more, so it didn't make as much sense anymore.
So yeah, I mean, if there is anything else that you want to add to sort of stuff that Matt was going through. Like maybe you have different areas that you'd want to highlight as problematic that might benefit from having like a lower role like that's above group owners. That would be cool to see.
Okay, so you're talking about the new role being at the group level.
No, so well, let's assume that we have something big, slightly bigger than a group, but not as big as an instance, right? So we have kind of a new container, and that then allows enterprises to decide to use .com, or if they have a self-managed instance, they're able to kind of start siloing like departments like from each other if they want to use the same instance, but not necessarily have those departments overlap. We have one large customer that's asked for this, but yeah, if there's anything that you're, I mean, back to my earlier question, like as a support person, I know there are some pain points where you're like, I really wish that customers were able to do this themselves rather than support folks having to do this for them. That was the 2-factor point that I made. And then, yeah, if just as your experience like working with self-managed sysadmins and whatnot, if there's anything that you feel would be beneficial like to have as at the additional role level, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I do think a lot of this could be moved to a different level. The couple of high-level things I mentioned, the confusion or lack of understanding about which settings are enforced versus just being a default, that causes some confusion. And then some of the settings at a group level for self-managed customers, they don't want group owners to have that level of control, the LDAP piece being one of them. Let me see what else is at the group level.
One thing that we've focused on quite a bit in our research so far is user management. So it's really hard for group owners completely on .com to be able to manage and like create, manage, and delete users. They can't do that right now. They can only invite people, which is kind of a big pain point for a lot of customers that decide not to use our SaaS model for that reason. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge issue for .com customers. For self-managed, maybe not as much, although having that feature exposed for self-managed customers might be beneficial in a larger enterprise that has a little bit more autonomy in smaller groups. So maybe letting, a department level maybe has their own SAML or LDAP, and they want to manage their own user set compared to another department.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Is there just on the user management aspect? I mean, one argument could be, okay, well, why don't we let group owners create user management? Like, would there be any reason from your perspective as to why we wouldn't? Why it's bad? Why it would be bad to let group owners be able to do that?
I don't know, to be honest. There's
no like right or wrong answer. I'm just curious. Like if anything like immediately comes to mind is like, no, we shouldn't do that for XYZ reason.
Yeah, I'm not sure. If it's, I don't really know how the group managed accounts thing works yet. I haven't looked into that, but if a group, well, yeah, you wouldn't want to give a group owner the ability to delete a user that is, not just in their group. Even within, like me as an employee of GitLab, you could even say maybe that GitLab wants to be able to manage my account. Let's say I leave the company, they want to delete my user, but if I also have like personal projects or personal groups outside of that, that could potentially be destructive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else that you want to touch on? Like, what is your experience having been a systems administrator before and like working with folks who have that role from a self-managed perspective, like what are some of the typical pain points that people run into on a regular basis?
Trying to think what else. A lot of the organizations just really do like to control as much as they can from the top level. Some other things that I've seen organizations want to do at a global level is like integrations with other systems that they use. They want to configure Jira integration at the instance level, Jenkins. I think that there are a lot of customers that wanted that pipeline enforcement feature that Matt was showing earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you think there's a use case there for customers that are using .com? They might want to be able to, I mean, I know there's definitely been some discussion around like being able to connect their own LDAP server and whatnot to .com so they can manage it that way. But for other integrations, I'm actually not familiar at the moment with what's possible in terms of what people can and can't currently integrate with groups if they're using GitLab.com versus self-managed. But yeah, that's an interesting point I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of .com customers that are missing a lot of those features. I mentioned just how vast the settings are in the admin area, and compared to a group, no comparison. There are some things that we probably don't want to take out of the admin area down to a group level. I don't know exactly what those are at the moment, but there probably are some.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, do you know anything that we absolutely shouldn't like let anyone but a sysadmin at the instance be able to use?
Some of the authentication stuff seems like something that you may not want to move. For instance, self-managed may not want users to be able to sign up, or they may need to configure LDAP or SAML at the instance level rather than a group level.
That's actually an interesting point. So like, and this is something we should consider in the future, but we've talked about having workspace admins to be able to create, manage, delete the users, but there is, like you just said, there's a setting where you can be like turn off registration if you want. So they might not, maybe they don't want people to be able to register for a group. I don't even know how you would go about doing that now, like, because you can only invite people. So it's not really a problem, but I foresee it maybe becoming one if we turn on. I don't know if that's something that we need to just think about in the future. Like if you go to like customer.gitlab.com and they have their own registration or sign up page that just registers them for that workspace or group or whatever, we'd need to be able to allow them to stop registration if they don't necessarily they want more control over like the amount of users that they have. For example, like at the moment, I know that the growth department are working on implementing a new way of charging users. So when a group owner decides that they want to add users, it just bills their credit card like at the time of adding them. So like if people are able to register, then that takes the autonomy away from billing admin to be able to go, I want these users to be added. So registration might be a little bit tricky at the workspace level if we were going to do that.
Yeah, I would be interested to see what kind of demand there would be for that. Right now, the group SAML is the only place where we have like a sign-in page specific to a group. So there is no like sign up or even just like local GitLab authentication for groups.
Maybe what's that page look like? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I don't think I've seen that page before, like where you sign in via group SAML.
Let me see.
Maybe I have seen it actually. I think there's like a manage SSO test group on .com that has it.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty simple. If it doesn't automatically redirect, it's probably just a pretty generic page with a link to redirect. Here, let's see if this works.
much time do we have left?
About 20 minutes.
We don't
Or I
have to take
guess
up the whole 20 minutes. If we, I think that we've got through a lot of stuff today. It's been really helpful.
Yes, 10 minutes with the invite. This is the page for a test group on GitLab.com with SAML enabled.
So what happens when you click that? What does the user see?
It'll redirect to, I think in this case, Azure.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so this would like potentially redirect to like Okta or something if they had that, if we integrated with Okta. Gotcha.
Yep. And that's the only only authentication specific to a group level right now, and only on .com. We don't offer this for self-managed.
Okay, so then one part of workspaces that we were thinking about, like for an early iteration, is like the ability to like have workspace admins to, like, they can turn that off, and like it's still limited as to how you sign in to like your workspace organization, but you still have to use this is an extension of group managed accounts, right? So like instead of you would still enforce like users only with this domain can log in. Like they can still the workspace admin can still create a user for them, but if they try and like log in at all with any other email address, it doesn't work. So, but that's kind of more about like registration, because if the workspace admin is creating users for them, then I guess that doesn't really matter that much, like domain enforcement, because the end user will never be able to set that anyway. The user will because they can't register. Sorry, that was a rambling way of saying that, but yeah. All right, cool. Well, I don't.
You're muted.
Sorry, I said I don't actually have any more questions that I can think of at the top of mind for now. This has been really helpful just to kind of like walk through some sort of pain points and get a better understanding of it. But I don't know if Amanda, you have any questions?
No, this has been great. I've just been absorbing all the information.
Workspaces sounds like it could be really neat. Sounds like a lot of work too.
Yeah, this is the thing that we're running into. I mean, the end goal is to have like a way better enterprise experience. .com. There's a lot of customers that just aren't adopting .com right now because groups just aren't enough. You can't do enough with them. It's not private enough. It's not secure enough. It's not rich enough in terms of features that they need, both from an admin level and from just an individual contributor level. So I think Workspaces opens up a lot of doors. But yeah. All right. Well, thank you both for this. This has been super helpful. Do you mind if I post this on Unfiltered? I think it could be cool to add to our direction page for Workspaces. So lets people just see some of the conversations that are happening about it.
Sure.
Great. All right, cool. Well, have a good rest of your Wednesday. Thank you very much for your time. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Drew.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Drew.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.